For years, people have been reporting strange objects and lights in the sky over the Shenandoah Valley. From December 1964 through May of 1965, there were almost a dozen reports in Augusta County alone. All of this was started by a reported UFO landing near Fishersville that prompted Project Blue Book, a top-secret UFO investigation program, to launch an investigation. I'm Jacob Fife. Join me as I take a closer look at the reported landing and dig into recently declassified reports from the investigation. On December 21st, 1964, gunsmith Horace Burns claimed to have seen a 90-foot-high beehive UFO land in the field behind me. According to Burns, when he was driving towards Waynesboro, his car came to a stop. And after he had restarted and pulled his car over, he looked in the field behind me and claimed to see a huge UFO with a beaming light underneath. So Burns, being curious, got up and went to go see what was happening. And when he got close to the craft, around 20 to 30 feet, he said it made no sound, but it did emit a strange heat from the bottom of it. He said it sat there for a few minutes before slowly hovering about 20 feet in the air and then taking off straight up and disappearing. Now, Burns was able to get back in his vehicle, which he noted had somehow shifted itself into park while he was gone, which was a little strange. So he went 4 days without reporting the sighting until he talked to his wife, who convinced him to not only talk to a local reporter about it, but also send a report to a secret program called Project Blue Book. What was Blue Book? Blue Book followed two other projects, Project Sign in 1947 and Project Grudge in 1948. The purpose of these projects was to investigate and study UFO sightings and determine whether or not they posed a threat. Starting in 1952, investigations were launched into reports all over the country. By the end of the program in 1969, Blue Book investigated almost 13,000 reports. 701 were deemed unexplained. For Blue Book to investigate a case, there had to be a possible threat, and the rash of sightings was enough for them to send multiple agents to Fishersville. So after Mr. Burns sent his report off to Project Blue Book headquarters at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they actually reviewed it for a few days. They were probably trying to decide whether or not there was potential national security threat, but they ultimately decided that there was. And they didn't just send any reporter or investigator. They sent Sergeant David Moody, who was one of the top officials in Project Blue Book, and he was usually only sent to the biggest UFO cases. So Moody and two other investigators boarded a plane at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they flew in here to the Shenandoah Valley Regional Airport. Now, Moody was always a skeptic. In every investigation, he quickly dismisses the eyewitnesses and the claims of people's sightings, and he usually had very short reports, but Fishersville was different. And once they got off the plane and checked in, they were met by Burns, a professor from Eastern Mennonite University who took the initial Geiger counter readings with Burns, and one other person, and they drove towards Fishersville. The whole way they were talking about the sighting. Moody had a list of questions that he was asking the professor as well as Mr. Burns. And then the investigation reached a whole other level. After the investigators arrived, they questioned Burns and then a reporter who was the initial one to break the story about the sighting, the road, and then how he felt afterwards. Now, in the initial reports, Sergeant Moody said that Burns seemed legit. He didn't seem to be hoaxing, making up as he went, and that his details and account stayed true to what he had initially reported. So Burns and the reporter took the investigators from Blue Book all over this area. They brought their own Geiger counter equipment, and even though it had been over 2 weeks since his sighting, they still found strange impressions in the ground, strange impressions that would not end up in the government report, but were reported in a local newspaper article. Towards the end of the investigation, they would once again interview Burns, and it seems to be that they tried to trip him up on as little detail as possible, but every single time, Burns kept his story straight, and the Blue Book investigators were confused by what had taken place. Stanton would become the epicenter of UFO sightings as well as UFO reporting and later even UFO panic. After the initial Fishersville sighting was reported, local reporters would flock to the story and they would try to compile as many UFO related stories as they could. So Stanton was a big community even in the 1960s, and word traveled very, very fast. So once word came to town that investigators from Project Blue Book had flown in from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, people quickly started wondering, are we in danger? Is everything okay? Are we actually under attack? So throughout the course of Blue Book's investigation, they would not only hang around Fishersville and Stanton, they would go all over Rockingham and Augusta County, and they would even take a trip all the way to Charlottesville to the observatory that was there at the time. So every step of the way of their investigation, no matter where they went, reporters from Stanton and Waynesboro would follow them. After the panic set in, after a few more sightings in February, many people would flock to Stanton because they felt like this was the epicenter, this is where it began. Many locals were adamant that they saw something strange in the skies. And they felt like with the UFO sightings growing in numbers, and even some people believing that they were getting closer to people, they felt like Augusta County and their lives were in danger, that the local sheriff was requesting help from the Virginia National Guard as well as the state police because people were congregating in Stanton and in Waynesboro and forming militias. And what they would do is they would patrol street corners, back roads, and even the main roads with armed posses looking for aliens. And this would cause a huge flare-up in sightings as well as people getting injured. So with the sightings getting out of control, what was Blue Book doing to kind of ease people's fears when something like this would happen? Well, as it turns out, they didn't do much except for go silent and discredit anyone and everyone who claimed to have seen something. So things really kicked up a notch in Augusta County when a local preacher started claiming that the recent sightings of UFOs and the close proximity to people was a sign of the apocalypse. After a while, word started spreading through Augusta and Rockingham and even Rockbridge County through congregations that the UFO sightings were a sign of the apocalypse. And not only that, but that the apocalypse was going to take place right here. So that was really the main catalyst for why and how things got out of control to where even local law enforcement really couldn't stop the panic. Everywhere, people were talking about the latest sightings. Some people were saying that they saw creatures in the woods. They saw creatures looking out of these ships. A lot of these sightings would go unreported until years later. But local journalists, they ran absolutely wild with this. And that's what made the Project Blue Book investigation so intriguing. You see, Sergeant Moody was only called to investigate the most credible and potentially dangerous UFO sightings. So the fact that he was here in the first place means that they must have felt that there was a threat to national security and public safety here in Augusta County. So the Project Blue Book investigators got here on January 12th, 1965. But they left in early February. So even though sightings and the investigation was really just getting started and heating up, and there were multiple sightings being reported per day, why did they leave so soon? Well, I found a report that said they were called back because there was another incident taking place between an unidentified flying object and a U.S. Air Force fighter jet in Ohio. Now, that's all the report and the letter says. And after looking online, I wasn't able to find any documentation of what they were talking about. But whatever it was caused Blue Book to recall all of their investigators from this case and two other cases back to headquarters at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So what happened with that U.S. fighter encounter? And why hasn't it been talked about? Why are there no files or records or stories? Whatever it was the reason the Fishersville investigation stopped, but that wasn't the end of Blue Book's involvement. So after Sergeant Moody and the rest of the Blue Book investigators went back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, UFO sightings would still continue to be reported to local papers as well as local police departments. But as quickly as they came, the UFO sightings went away. And slowly, life returned to normal in Augusta and Rockingham County. People forgot about the little surge and what was going on. People quickly forgot about it, except for Project Blue Book. According to not a report, but a letter between the director and Sergeant Moody, Project Blue Book would keep a secret presence in Augusta County, particularly Stanton, all the way up until September of 1965. Why? Well, they don't exactly say, but maybe they felt there was still a national security risk. And that's why they kept investigators hidden among the crowds here in Stanton. Who knows? Maybe people are still here.